Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this extraordinary General Assembly. My name is David Khoza. I'm the OAGS Secretariat, which is the Organization of African Geological Surveys. It is an organization that represents geoscientific surveys across the African continent. So I also work for my own country's geological survey, which is the Council for Geoscience. There, my role is the executive manager of integrated geoscience development. We are responsible for, in effect, just implementing geoscientific projects in South Africa. So thanks. I just want to give you a introduction to what the OAGS is, the organization that it represents, and also some of the projects that we've been doing in the African continent. So the OAGS was established in 2007, around February, and it was really meant to be the leading voice of geoscientific matters in the African continent. The idea was that geological surveys come together, they promote the contribution of geosciences in Africa's development and assist lawmakers in particular on the technical advice and what role geosciences can play in Africa. It was also meant to promote and provide some sort of a collaborative network among African member states. The realization was that us within the continent, we do not really collaborate with each other. So the OAGS was formed to foster that partnership. As far as the mandate is concerned, it's really what I've spoken about, that the implementation of geoscientific programs across Africa in partnership with other global partners, other geoscientific surveys globally. And the idea was that we focus on issues relating to economic development of Africa in particular. So this is some of the vision, mission, and values of the OAGS, largely meant to develop African geosciences in particular, and look at capacity building, information sharing, joint project implementation. And the membership of the survey, of the OAGS, is open to all African geological surveys, which is currently about 54 countries, but we only have about 40 active members. This is simply because some of the African countries do not have geological surveys existing currently. And we are working with those countries' ministries to develop geological surveys. As far as the governance structure is concerned, we have OAGS president, currently led by the director of the National Geological Survey of Senegal, Dr. Rokhaya, and she is supported by vice presidents across the regions. We've got the regions in Northern Africa, Central Africa, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, and Western Africa. And these are the vice presidents that are supporting the president. And then our CEO of the Council for Geoscience is the permanent secretariat of the OAGS. So the secretariat is basically responsible for coordinating efforts within the OAGS and supporting the executive committee in implementing mandate of the OAGS. So as far as geological surveys are concerned in Africa, they're really not that dissimilar to many of the geological surveys in Europe, North America, in Asia, in that their role is to provide geoscientific information. This information needs to be used for very specific purposes. So in our case, as the OAGS members collect both onshore and offshore geoscientific data, and this information is used to encourage in other regions minerals and energy assessment, groundwater resources, looking at environmental issues, agricultural development, infrastructure development and assisting in the mapping and the characterization of the different geohazards. This is largely what geological surveys in Africa are responsible for. And being scientific organizations, they have to conduct geoscience research. So in terms of the collaborations and partnerships, one of the key mandates of the OAGS is to develop and form collaborative partnerships within the OAGS, but also with organizations outside Africa. And over the last couple of years, the OAGS has been implementing a couple of projects, particularly with the European Geological Survey, so EuroGeo surveys. And this project has largely been a training component that has different work packages, and that is meant to really provide training to different African geological surveys. So the Pan-Af-Geo project, it's largely been a training program, and the first phase of the program concluded around 2019, and we are now implementing the second phase of the project, also supported by the European Geological Surveys, and that is also largely in part a practical training program. So we also collaborate with other geological surveys within Africa. So the Geological Society of Africa is one of our key partners. And currently we are efforting to get the OAGS to be formally recognized within the African Union. And this is very, very important in a sense that if it's formally recognized in the AU structures, then it can really be official leading voice of matters related to geosciences within the African continent. So there's an effort to jointly recognize OAGS within the structures of the African Union. So what does the OAGS focus on? And I mentioned this before, that a big part of the focus points for the OAGS is to look at issues around community safety, so geological hazards, understanding where seismicity is, subsidences, landslides, and all manner of geological hazards across the African continent. And this is quite critical, particularly when one starts to look at what's happening now globally in terms of climate change. And we know that we're going to have a lot of these geohazards to deal with. So a big part of the research across the African continent is looking at geological hazards. Water security is a big issue across the globe, but particularly in Africa. Minerals resources development. We know that in order for us to transition to a low carbon economy, we need to find these minerals. And a lot of them would be in Africa. So OAGS is fostering implementation of projects with African member states to characterize these minerals in each African country. Energy security, environmental mapping, marine economy, science-based policy design. This is quite important because OAGS feels like a lot of the policies that have been developed in Africa, they are not informed necessarily by robust scientific inputs. And this is where the OAGS would like to seriously strengthen the capacity within African member states to be able to contribute to scientific policy design. Research and innovation, I mentioned before, and this is largely so that continuous research can be done within the African continent, looking specifically at these issues. So one of the critical programs that we'll be embarking on in the next couple of years is regional characterization of groundwater resources across the African continent. And this is looking at characterizing, in particular, aquifers along political boundaries, if you like. So this transboundary aquifer mapping program is meant to look at how countries within Africa can collaborate across the borders in mapping water basins that are across each borders. It is becoming increasingly clear that groundwater in particular will become a critical issue of contention among the different member states. And this is why the OAGS is focusing on understanding groundwater resources, in particular along the country borders. Minerals resources is exactly the same in understanding and characterizing different mineral potentials for all the African countries. Though that information can be used to inform on how they can be sustainably exploited in supporting net zero objectives for each of the countries. And the focus in terms of minerals resources is really the critical minerals, so-called minerals of the future. These are minerals that are required and are necessary for technologies needed to transition to low carbon economies. In terms of community safety, this is really looking at how we can characterize subsidence, sinkholes, landslides. A lot of the African countries are suffering from landslides after heavy rain, and this need not be. And this is the understanding, the geotechnical understanding of where these landslides are likely to occur is quite critical, and that can inform infrastructure development in places. So some of the key projects that the OAGS has done, the Geological and Mineral Map of Africa at 1 in 5 million scale. That map has been published for the whole Africa. The seismotectonic map, also at the same scale. This looks at areas that are most active when it comes to seismicity. Geoheritage is quite key for the OAGS, and this is really in fostering local economic development, in identifying some of these geosites that can be used, to foster tourism development, for example. I mentioned PanArcGeo project. This program has really been a training program that has provided training for over 1,000 geoscientists across different African countries. And this is continuing as we speak on a practical component where geoscientists are introduced to different work packages when it comes to minerals, groundwater, geotechnical, geological mapping, things like that. So that is currently ongoing, phase 2, and this is a collaboration with the European Geological Survey. I mentioned the transboundary aquifer mapping program and also focusing on infrastructure in terms of having key scientific equipment that African member states can have access to for them to use to collect the necessary data. Development and hosting of integrated geoscience data portal. This is really, really key. The idea is that we have one portal, data portal, across the African continent. So it's a very ambitious target, but we've already started working on this. So this would be a portal that hosts all manner of geological information, geophysical data, geochemical data, hydrogeology, geotechnical information. And this is really meant to be a one-stop shop for everybody, anyone wanting access to the data, whether locally or internationally. And this would be important in terms of developing research programs. So the data portal program, if you like, is really meant to get African member states to identify what the base geoscience data sets they have. And each country then must prioritize the different themes, as I mentioned. So whether it's minerals, water, geotechnical, all of those thematic areas, those data sets that have been identified can be used for that purpose. And we use then the geoscience portal to disseminate that information. And the idea is that this should be freely available information across African countries. And given that all of the geological surveys are meant to do research, it's most important that we focus on modern geoscience data and interpretation techniques that can be developed. One of the most important items for the OAGS is how to communicate this information to the different communities. There's no point in collecting this information and we don't really get to inform policy development, and that this information is meant to assist, and these are the local communities. So a big part of the program that we're efforting is how to effectively communicate this geoscience data. Ultimately, though, we'd like this knowledge to contribute to policy formulation in line with the continental policy on Agenda 2063. So this is really the ultimate intention when it comes to OAGS. All the projects that we're doing are following this project implementation framework, where we assess whether that project has had the necessary impact. So the data portal, as I mentioned, is quite important, and we'll be publishing the first version of it towards the beginning of next year. And really, this is looking at having the ability to host all manner of data sets so that that information can be disseminated to different member states and also to other people who are interested outside the African continent. Infrastructure development in supporting African member states. This is information regarding having the ability to have high performance computing, various analytical equipment, XRT, XRF, and having the ability to collect information ourselves across the African continent. So we're hoping that we'll get enough momentum so that we should be able to run these type of data collection and also analysis ourselves. Capacity building across the African continent. This is part of what PanAfGeo is trying to do. And this is really developing more and more geological, geoscientific skills. And here, it's really about having access to modern equipment and modern softwares for geoscientists to be able to use. And this is where the key driver has been. And we currently looking at joint implementation and having a pool of instruments that can be shared across the African continent. And the capacity that needs to be built is not only related to knowing how to look at geoscientific information, how to collect it, but also how to communicate that information, particularly to the communities that we represent. So a large part of the sustainability of African geosciences in particular depends on having financial resources, but also forming collaborative projects or implementing collaborative programs with international organizations. So I'm hoping that this discussion that you will be having here will stimulate yourselves as an organization, as a group, to collaborate with the OAGS in implementing some of the programs in Europe and also in Africa. Thank you very much for the attention, and I hope to meet all of you soon. Thank you very much.